to Ability Assistance. My name is Phyllis Jones, Chair of the North Andover Commission on Ability Assistance.
My name is Stacy Leibowitz, Secretary of the North Andover Commission on Ability Assistance.
North Andover residents, please stay tuned after the show for important various town announcements. Today's guest is Mary Beth Landy, Senior Trader and Support Specialist from the Federation for Children with Special Needs. Welcome.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. We always start off asking, how'd you come to this place? Everybody comes to this industry because of some sort of a personal experience.
Absolutely. And mine definitely is a passion of the heart. I adopted 2 sisters through DCF many years ago. They're now grown adults, so I can't even keep count anymore.
How old were they at the time?
They were 7 and 9.
And how old are they now?
They are now 25 and 27.
All right, so we're talking roughly 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Yep. And they had come with a lot of special needs, which we were not sure what they were, so we started the process when they had come. And we had a fabulous school psychologist at the elementary school where they attended. And they were placed on individualized education programs, both of them. My youngest daughter has a reading disability as well as developmental childhood trauma and the alphabet soups of diagnosis that come along with that. And my oldest had delays, educational delays, and also developmental childhood trauma. So it really opened my eyes to the process, and kind of a baptism by fire. You just get them. Nobody trains you on how to do this.
Which, if particularly any mom who has to live through this, that's exactly how they deal with it.
Yep, exactly. I worked as a family advocate for years, helping people gaining resources on things like getting in touch with the Federation, Disability Law Center, Mass Advocates for Children, the go-to
A lot of
places.
which who have been on our show.
Exactly. And I worked as a family advocate, a family partner, for Riverside Community Care for about 3 years, and noticed that a lot of the children that I worked with who all had mental health issues needed to have an IEP and were not able to access the services. Their parents were so busy dealing with hospital and doctor's appointments and therapy, and but they really needed the services in school, and there were not enough advocates to be able to help them in mental health. So I went to the Federation to seek training through their Parent Consultant Training Institute, and have never left. Actually,
The rest is history.
the rest is history. So I've been there over 8 years, or it's well past 100 months. That's how I like to categorize it.
You're beyond your training period. and you're-
Exactly.
and
Easily.
you're- what do they call it?
Probationary
Thank
stage.
you.
Yes, well
you.
beyond that.
So what do you do for them now at this
So
point?
I am a senior trainer and support specialist
Okay.
for the Recruitment Training and Support Center for Special Education Surrogate Parents. So our project works with volunteers that we recruit, and we train them and then offer individual supports for people who work as surrogate parents for the special education needs of children in DCF custody.
Okay.
Wow,
So
very important.
if a child in DCF custody is not living with a foster parent who would make their education decisions, or a relative, they are usually placed in congregate care facilities or group homes. Those students need to have someone to be able to make special education decisions, and the social worker from DCF is not allowed to do that because of conflict of interest.
Right,
That makes sense.
So we appoint, we have a sister program who appoints them, the students, based off geographical matches with our volunteers, and they serve as the decision makers, the education decision makers for the students.
It's almost like an advocate for them in
Yes.
the school
Yep.
system, and they're unpaid.
It is all volunteer.
That's amazing. How
So-
many people do you have doing that?
We have about 600 volunteers.
That's amazing.
The need is always growing, particularly for kids in DCF with the trauma and the mental health issues
makes
that they
sense.
have.
And I would suspect that you're dealing with a lot of uptake in terms of just overall trauma with youth in this post-lockdown period. I don't know that anybody likes calling it post-COVID because it's
It's still
Still
around.
around.
It's
I
the
got
new
it a
norm.
couple weeks ago, so
But
yes.
as the result of people being, as you say, in
Lockdown.
lockdown and maybe not having access to resources, because obviously there is a huge mental health issue across the board, whether you are a
Especially
child
with our
or
young children.
across the age span, but yes, especially for younger people because of issues with schooling, and then if you deal with children in DCF, I would imagine that just compounds it.
Yeah, there was a lot of challenges with the
Yeah.
kids in DCF. There was getting them the laptops that they
Yep.
needed, and then they couldn't get on the Wi-Fi in the group home because it was secure for their own protection. And
Yeah.
so accessing it was a challenge for our surrogate parents. But thankfully, they're back. Most of them are back in school.
Good.
That's great.
It is a requirement from DCF that they be enrolled immediately and transportation be provided. So most of the kids are back in school unless they've had to be hospitalized or something. But that is what my project does. We work specifically with the surrogate parents. We don't work with the children.
Okay.
We have a partner program from a colleague of mine that is called Pathways for Parents. And Eileen Sandberg runs that, and she is a child of parents of 5 children, all on IEPs. So we share our horror stories or our battle stories, I think.
Battle
stories.
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 Makes sense.
And she also does trauma trainings with me, so we're trauma
And she
training
works
buddies.
with parents
She works
versus-
with
That's
the
what it was, yeah.
families that are involved with DCF.
versus you work with people who are assisting children.
Correct. Correct.
From a
And
third-party point of
she
view.
works a lot with the family resource centers throughout Massachusetts, who provide services to a diverse population in particular towns. I believe there are 30 of them now.
Okay.
Or they're moving towards that 30. And these are places that parents, regardless of language barriers, can go to receive. There is a school liaison in every office. There is assistance with childcare. There is assistance with adult education if they need to, parents need to help with their own educational purposes. They are fabulous.
Where's the closest one to North Andover? Do you know?
It would probably be in Lawrence. I think
There
Lawrence
should
is
be
the
one in
closest.
Lawrence?
Yes.
That's
They're
right
usually
here.
in the high needs areas.
Which would make sense.
Yeah.
But I
Lawrence
would suspect
definitely-
they don't only work for people in Lawrence. They just happen to be geographically located there.
So it's regional, in other words.
So if somebody happens to fall under that umbrella who happens to live in Andover, North Andover, Methuen, Haverhill,
They can participate.
they can
in those
participate in that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
great.
absolutely. Another agency that I wanted to mention, or a group, John Crocker, who is the director of counseling service, guidance services at Methuen, used to be director of. He used to work. I mean, he has worked his way up the ladder from one of the adjustment counselors. He actually runs an organization where he brings together all of the, almost the entire state at this point, adjustment counselors, school psychologists from
Oh, wow.
schools, and works on training them. Particularly, they're working a lot on trauma training.
That's great.
But also
Very important.
assessing the mental health needs of the students in their school districts. So Methuen is kind of close to my heart for that reason.
That
John
makes sense.
is an excellent go-to person. He's done a lot of trainings for us. But really having a tool for adjustment counselors to work with students and to
And
find
they
students.
need so much of that. My son used to be in a partially integrated sub-separate classroom situation here in North Andover, and his needs became too intense for the public school system. So we put him into the assessment center, and now he's at a therapeutic day school in Beverly. But talking to the folks who run those programs here in town, they have a lot more need for those sub-separate, partially integrated classroom situations, to the point of that you're not getting the 2-to-1 type of a ratio,
Right.
which those programs were initially meant for.
And part of that, the staff shortages
Yeah.
are huge.
Yeah, that's true across
We
the
forget that
industry.
COVID affected the adults as well.
Yes.
Exactly.
And so, I have heard of stories where the special ed classroom, particularly in a district, is being taught by a paraprofessional because they lost their professional.
Yes.
And they've gotten emergency licensures for that. This island of Nantucket does not have an occupational therapist on the island
Really?
because they can't afford to live there.
Yeah.
Because it's
Okay.
become so expensive,
Yeah.
and we can't
the
say
pay-
these are not the highest paying jobs.
Jobs.
And
So-
that's where the disconnect, I think, is. That's a whole other conversation.
But
that-
they have thought outside of the box.
Yeah.
And so Nantucket, every Wednesday, flies 2 occupational therapists from Hyannis to the island.
That's a wonderful way of
Everybody
rethinking
gets
it.
their
Yeah.
physical therapy, their occupational therapy on Wednesday, and then at 5 o'clock, they fly them back to Hyannis.
Yep.
So thinking out of
So
the
the
box in
service
terms
is
of this
there.
is really important
Not
at this time.
perfect, but a fantastic workaround.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Because you can't expect to have somebody on every service available on an island the
island,
size
yeah.
of Nantucket. So it's fabulous. And that kind of leads me to the, we have the Parent Training and Information Center, which was really the hub of the Federation. So the
Okay.
Federation was formed by 5 groups of parents who sat around a kitchen table back in 1973, 74, and said, how do we get education for our kids?
Isn't that always how
allowed.
those
Yeah, it
types of
is.
things
It
start?
is.
It's somebody's
Yep.
little
Little coffee
pipe
clutch.
dream,
Yep.
you know, and
Yeah.
all of a sudden it balloons.
And they moved on and started working, they formed a coalition. And actually, if you notice, the logo for the Federation is 5 hearts.
Yes.
Yes.
Those are for the 5 families that
Oh,
initiated
that's
it.
wonderful.
Oh, wow.
And Martha Ziegler happened to be the one of the founding members of that group, and went on to become the founder of the Federation, which was not the Federation at the time. But they also worked with Bob Crabtree, who is my guru and the special ed attorney, I think, in the nation. He not only went to the state and got Chapter 766 passed, which
Oh,
is
wow.
this is his 50-year anniversary, so I bring that up. But also, he went
okay.
on to pass the federal law, which is now called IDEA, or Individuals
Yes,
with Disabilities
yes.
Education Act.
Oh,
So-
from a legal standpoint, I'd be in awe to meet him. I'm also an attorney, so that's one of those people, you know, you just sit back and go, gee, I'd really love to meet you just to shake your hand and say thank you.
And he is such a great guy. He offers his time and services to
Amazing.
train our professionals all the time. So he's a dear place in my heart.
Absolutely,
With
that
Bob.
makes sense.
But so the Federation eventually rolled around. We're the first parent consultant, training and information center in the country. So every state has one. It's just housed in different organizations.
And it's modeled after Massachusetts.
Absolutely. We have the Parent Consultant Training Institute in that, and that is an 8 to 9 week course.
Okay.
Once a week, or during June, our summer course is 5 days direct, and a lot of like teachers will take the course
So
because
it's like a boot camp
Yeah.
almost.
Exactly.
That's great.
Intense
Because
boot
it's good
camp.
for their timing being
Exactly.
off
They're
the school year. That
Exactly.
totally
makes
off of
sense.
school.
And it's easier sometimes for people who can take a week's vacation to do it, where they can't take every Friday off for 8
Right.
weeks. We also offer it's asynchronous. So for people who want to be able to learn on their own time, we record our sessions. So I do a trauma training for them because I think it's just so important, because we have just been through a major trauma that has impacted our kids.
Of course.
But also, as far as teachers sometimes don't realize that they've got kids in their classroom who suffer from trauma. They get
Yes.
tagged as a behavioral issue, and if we
Right.
start looking at behaviors as a form of communication,
Right.
we cover
That
the
it's
kids
a-
in the class.
How are those trainings covered for the schools and for the parents?
So for the parent, the Parent Consultant Training Institute is a fee-for-service training. So, but we do have scholarships.
Okay.
So there's a fee for
Right.
parents, there's a fee for professionals, and then there's also scholarships available to the parents.
That's great.
And there's also a discount, but I'll get to that later.
Ooh.
And they take the course, and then if they want to basically become a parent consultant for the Federation, not in a paid position, but in a referral position. They can then go on to work for the Information Center, which is the phone number you call in for the state if you have questions about special education. If you
Right.
need help about my child is in this situation and what do I do? You know, how do I handle this?
That
So
makes sense.
Ingrid Arvidsson, a close friend of mine, is the manager of that, and she has people around the state who take phone calls or emails. I believe there are about 16,000 emails or phone calls a year.
That
they,
sounds low, actually.
it is, that might be an old number that I am quoting. They are sometimes absolutely swamped, and right now they're also working with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education on that transition program for kids that were in their 20s when COVID was happening, and therefore they lost out on
So that
transition
transition,
services.
right,
So
right.
they're being compensated for that. So she is overseeing that for the state. So she's kind of doing two things at the same time. But their information specialists can answer questions on pretty much everything. If it comes to something like mental health or trauma, sometimes they throw it my way just to lighten their load a little. I used to run the call center when we were in person in Boston before I transferred into my current position. And Ingrid always ran the center in Western Mass in person, and then we went remote. So we have remote people right now.
Right.
But you can do an internship and help out with the calls through the internship, which is 25 hours, and then it's 25 hours of volunteer work, which we partner with the Institute. So if they want to become a special education surrogate parent, which is a volunteer position, it covers for their internship, and then they can be
Okay.
listed as an advocate on our we have a database
What
that they
about,
can be listed.
I know there are kids still in college who still have the need to or desire to do special education. Do you offer any sort of internships to them, help give them that spark that even if they're just an education major, maybe throw them a little bit towards the special ed spectrum of things?
We do. In fact, Ingrid and I just did a presentation at UMass Amherst for
Okay.
students. For my role as for special education surrogate parent, you must be 18. So as
Which
long as
college
you're 18 or
kids,
over.
yeah.
Yes,
Yep. And we ask for a 1-year commitment for folks, so there's continuity for the kids. Particularly the turnover at DCF can be high. The turnover
And
of
that's really
teachers
hard
can
for
be
them.
high.
That's
Yeah.
really
And
hard.
yes, we really want one consistent
Yeah.
person in their lives.
That's
So.
hard.
We work with, or Ingrid works with people who want to come in and volunteer. And out of that placement, that presentation we did, we've actually gotten several students who want to become surrogate parents,
That's
but also
great.
That's
some that want to do
fantastic.
internships at the Federation.
That's
So-
great, because they see firsthand. I know, because I've worked in the adult part of the industry, that we've seen a downswing, obviously with COVID, the staffing crisis. But I've worked with local colleges like Salem State and UMass Lowell, other places like UMass, and we're seeing a downswing of people going into social services. And so having that option, I think you get somebody in there and they see the value
Right,
Yeah.
of supporting
or even
and
psychiatry or psychology majors or
absolutely.
in some area of the
Yes.
service.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So-
And so we work with interns during the summertime, even high school interns.
That's great.
We have a program that we work with where they may come in and assist in different projects. So we also have a project, so Federation is kind of an umbrella that holds
Right.
13 projects. And we happen to be one of the Recruitment Training and Support Center is one of them. Family Ties, which is something many people may think of and not realize they're tied in with us because they're also funded through Department of Public Health.
okay.
So they are what I consider the go-to for resources in this state. They have 5 regional workers, coordinators who actually are located remotely in that area, who specialize in that particular area. Because if you're in Boston, you don't understand Western Mass very well.
Right.
It's a
Exactly.
very different.
And vice versa.
It's a very different area, town. You can't get there from here. I was trying to explain to somebody the other day, I live in Greenfield. You can't get to Pittsfield without driving up and around and
Right,
down. There's
right.
no shortcut through. And so we have the different regional areas, and they put out what we call the Pink Book, the Family Ties Resource Book.
Yeah, it's
I
an
know
amazing,
it is. We are
amazing
out
resource.
of copies. We run out every year. We are reprinting as we speak.
And can we make some arrangements? We can meet for, well, you can have coffee, I'll have tea, and as many as you're willing to spare.
Pat Cameron, the director, has already said yes. So
Oh, thank you, because
That's
I'd love to
wonderful.
send some to the library, to the police department,
I'll
and to
make
the
sure
fire
they have it.
department. Put it out there on North Andover Moms, because
Yep.
that's where I usually put things out there, in addition to our own Facebook
Right.
page, obviously.
And
Yeah.
And they'll be able to pick those up for
Right.
themselves.
And so you have the physical resource, which is important. Number one, is that also translated into Spanish? Is it available?
there are certain
Because-
sections of it that
Okay.
are
Because I know it's the-
Spanish related. It is in English, but it's also on their website.
I was going to ask that question
And
as well.
we are trying to make everything as accessible as
That's
possible
great.
to
What is that?
languages.
Do you know off the top of your head what that website is? If not, we can always post it later.
If you were to Google Family Ties of Massachusetts,
It'll come
it will
up.
take you directly to their website, and you can see a picture of the resource guide. If you click on it, it is searchable, so you don't have to thumb through pages trying to
that's
find
great.
it. I'm a paper person.
When it
but-
comes
Yeah.
to stuff like that, so am
yeah,
I.
I like the paper person. But if families are looking for respite, and
There
or
are no
families,
respite services around.
that's something that the Family Ties would help work on with
great.
you. But they also specialize in early intervention. So if families need to have a recent diagnosis and they need to pair up, they need to find themselves an early intervention services, they can help as to who has openings for what particular diagnosis in the area and things like that.
So how does an organization get into that document and
They
online?
do such extensive research. There are national, regional, and local organizations listed in the book.
Okay.
But if there is an organization that is available, contacting Family Ties,
Okay.
and they have their contact information for everyone on the website. Pat
That's great.
Cameron is the director of the program. They can speak to them, and because it is on, that's the one benefit of the online version. It can be
update
updated constantly.
Absolutely. I actually, you probably realize it, we've had probably half a dozen guests on this show that I found, just thumbing through the book and sending
It's an
out
amazing
emails and
resource.
telling them, this is who we are, this is what we do, we'd like to invite you on the show. Some of them are not located in Massachusetts, but this screen behind us then turns into a nice little Zoom screen. And we had an organization, I think they were out of Chicago,
Was this the
the dog.
the dogs?
Yeah.
I can't remember.
They-
It was
it was
Midwest.
Midwest in that area.
Might have been Michigan or something like
Might
that.
have been.
Yeah.
You can tell I've been living
but
in
they do
Massachusetts.
provide a service here.
Here.
It's national, so that's where.
And that's how I learned about
you
it.
know, we're
and
able to
they,
share that.
they were able to come in and,
Yeah.
but that's why I'm sitting there going,
Yeah,
please,
It's an
can I
amazing
please?
resource.
The
Amazing.
interesting thing about it too is I like to say, as far as the regional coordinators they have, is not only if you need to have a ramp built on your house, not only can they tell you probably who can build it, but they'll probably tell you who can fund it too.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
for example, there is a program in Western Mass, many
Okay.
people don't know about, called the WILL program, and it funds families up to $500 to use for any special education or special needs that they have. So if they need to hire an advocate, they can go towards that. It can go towards buying a piece of equipment.
Right.
But there's also several organizations that will give families used equipment that has been donated to them. So that's why contacting Family Ties is great, because they can say, oh, don't buy it. Let's help you get
Right.
it for your
Funded.
your child, and because they're going to outgrow things.
Yeah.
It's such a great
Exactly.
connection. It's such a great, umbrella, as you say, to be able to connect people to all sorts of resources
Yes.
and services. I was so impressed with the Family Ties book. It just is amazing.
And they're
So,
wonderful. The
yeah.
resource coordinators are fabulous. There's also a parent-to-parent support. So if a parent receives a new diagnosis and is just kind of struggling with it, they can do support with a parent who has a child with the same diagnosis. or similar diagnosis,
Okay,
and they do
that's
phone
fantastic.
support.
That's amazing.
So it is actually a great program. It's not long-term support, but they can say, hey, I got support from this
Right.
organization, or let me put you in touch with this person. And so it's very helpful
And I
for new
think that
diagnosis.
that's, from a parent point of view,
It's
I think
huge.
that's huge,
huge.
because of the fact that, you know, you get this document, this neuropsych, and all of a sudden you're seeing acronyms of things you've never even heard of before that go beyond the typical ADHD, which typically everybody knows, irregardless of whether or not they've got a
But all
child
the
with
other
special needs.
pieces to it, and
But
how
you've
to
got
read
all
it,
of
how-
this
yeah.
and how they interact with each other, and you're sitting back and, you know, I know with me, I got a few extra gray hairs out of it.
I've earned every one of these.
And you know, you sit back and you go, what am I supposed to do with this?
And what does this mean?
Yeah.
And what does this mean? And how can I cope with it? Because the child's going through something, whatever it is that they're
But
going
so are
through.
you.
But so are
As
we.
a parent, and so having that peer-to-peer, I mean, I'm a sibling.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's a little bit of a different situation because I've been dealing with this the situation since day one.
But
And
imagine the type of support you could have had
Yeah.
back when.
I mean,
And there are a lot of sibling support groups
Yeah.
out now.
Yeah, I'm on one through Facebook, but it just shows having that support, even if it's not long-term, they can kind of help bridge the gap to the next stage.
Right.
One of my questions too is around transition, because obviously you focus on the parents and the children, but then there's that transition of aging out. You were talking about services that, you know, individuals did not receive
Right.
during that time, and that's a really tough time because I worked on the adult side, and there's a backlog of people who've turned 22 who are not getting services because there's not enough staff. It's this whole domino effect.
Yes.
And then, you know, even those who were receiving services before the pandemic and now have not been able to go back.
Yes.
So there's a whole mixed bag. What do you do as far as transition and supporting families, supporting maybe the person in question? What is that process like, especially in the light of COVID?
We have what we call the Link Center. It is our transition program. Rebecca Davis is the director of that. And the Link Center services kids from 14 to 22.
Okay.
Sometimes a little bit older if they're doing independent living and working, like the Boston Center for Independent Living. They do
Okay.
a lot of work with. They do a lot of work with Easter Seals, with
Easter Seals is great.
MRC, Mass Rehab
MRC,
Commission.
Mass Rehab
Yes.
Commission.
I try
yes.
not to use acronyms
Yes.
because
Because,
it's
yeah,
easy to
not
fall
everybody
back
knows,
into that.
but yes, I've
We
worked
live
with
in
them.
special ed is the world of acronyms.
Yes.
So they work with different programs, but they start with trying to develop a really strong transition plan. So if parents are going through that process, they offer a 2-day conference
Okay.
called Planning a Life, and they offer it about 5 times a year, and they guide each of those transition planning sessions or they're like mini conferences. They've specifically developed it like if you're navigating towards college. Trying to work with your student while they're still in high school. Very different things like that. Like you mentioned before about special education for kids who are older. Special education does not transfer into college.
And I think
So-
a lot of people don't
realize
realize
that.
Yeah.
When you turn 18, when you graduate, accept a graduation certificate, you no longer receive special education services. So the IEP stops, and you can get a 504, which is American with Disability Act document, to be able to get services in mostly modifications in,
Right, in college.
college.
Yeah.
But that's a whole different process that even kids sometimes are aware of, or young adults, I should say, aren't aware of, that in order to get additional time on a test, they have to go to every single professor, tell them what their diagnosis is. They have to be tied into
Which
disability
could
services.
sometimes be.
It can be challenging.
It's
I wasn't
challenging.
even
Yeah,
saying
but
it challenging. I was more thinking that they might be afraid that all of a sudden they'll have this stamp
This
on.
stigma
Yep.
on it. Yep.
Right.
But in order to get the services, they have to self-advocate.
Now,
It really
is that
is hard.
accepted only at the public colleges? Like I'm thinking the UMasses?
No,
or
it's
do
at
they-
any college.
So this person could be at Harvard. They use this, they can get the special assistance that they
Anyone
need.
over the age of 18. So I have,
they've aged out.
basically, I have like a 504 for my work situation because I have dyslexia and ADHD. So I have an understanding that things might not necessarily take me a little bit longer. But most importantly, I write like a newsletter every month. I need someone proofreading that because I don't pick up my own mistakes because of my dyslexia. I see the mistakes as normal.
Right.
And
Right,
even
right.
something as simple as spelling the word the. Sometimes one struggles with that. So, so anyone can have 504 as an adult. So, but
How
the
do you go
students,
about doing that?
the high school sometimes will transfer if you're a high school senior and you are looking at finishing, accepting a graduation in say 6 months. Sometimes in your IEP period is up, rather than giving you an IEP for 6 months, they may say, let's switch this to a 504. That's what they did with my kids.
What
So-
about children who weren't on IEPs in school? They're now in this post-lockdown
The
period.
diagnosis is a little bit later, or
And, or I know we've personally spoken about some different things from our own perspectives personally. How do people who are outside of the system, being outside of the DESE system, how do they go about getting this so that it can follow them? Because that might be beneficial to them as well.
Anyone can talk to their HR department if they are working or in the academic setting, if they go to any college, if they have a disability service department.
Okay.
And that's something that if you have knowledge that you have a disability going into it, it's good to select a college based off of the resources that they have. So you have, even if you've had an IEP, you still have to go to the disability service office, present your IEP and your last evaluations.
Okay.
So, and those have to be done within the last 3 years.
And when you say evaluations, I assume you're talking a neuropsych?
If you are able to, if not, it's the school evaluations that you
Okay.
have. And then they take a look at that and they write the 504 for you. Also based off of what the school can accommodate. Every school has some different areas that they can accommodate. And then they work the student through how they need to approach teachers, professors, about what their needs are going to be, whether it's additional time on a test, whether it is someone be able to share the professor's notes because they may possibly have difficulty taking notes, or
Right,
being able to tape record a class so that they can transcribe the notes later on,
the
things like that.
accommodations.
Exactly. So it's strictly accommodations. There's no modifications that happen because modifications
One
are
plus
part
one
of
still
IEP.
has to be two.
Yes.
But how you get to 1 + 1 in terms of
different.
figuring it out, reading it, writing it, speaking it, fill in the blanket.
It's how you learn it.
Yep. But it also ties into, I want to make sure that everyone realizes post-secondary doesn't necessarily mean just college.
Right.
So
right.
Trade
many of our
school.
kids go to vocational schools and want to go into the trades. And I'm encouraging my 13-year-old to go into the trades. We had a sewer collapse at our house. The excavator cost $10,000 for 1 day's of work. I should have gone into the trades. I'm in the wrong business. But it's something that's absolutely needed.
Yeah.
We
Oh,
will
most
always
definitely.
need plumbers and electricians. And so it is not an issue that you are really out of work. As
No, and in fact, we
there's
had
plenty of
Senator
need.
Tar on here last month, and we were joking because he and I are both lawyers, and we're sitting back going, the plumber or the electrician we needed to hire yesterday probably makes more billable hour than we do.
Absolutely. It is interesting, though. I recently heard of somebody who vision statement was that they wanted to be a plumber, but for outside plumbing only, because they didn't want to have to deal with the messiness of inside plumbing.
Oh, wow.
I thought that was a very
That's
specific vision
interesting.
statement, but we'll see how that pans out
Yeah.
in her goals. But the Link Center is fabulous at being able to also look at what are adult services that kids could possibly need once they turn 18, because even if they were a Department of Developmental Service student, they automatically age out at 18
Yes,
and they have to
yes.
reapply. Now, the high school can do the application process for them or the recommendation for
Right.
them, but they have to reapply for adult services. And maybe that
Yeah.
entails housing. Maybe that entails community participation. I happen to have a cousin who is also my godchild, who is a Department of Developmental Services client. And so she gets her housing through that. But they also help with her, she works a job.
Yep.
She's quite capable of that.
So she has funding around.
But she also has
pieces.
community, she has a better social life than I do. We're always joking as to how many boyfriends does she possibly have. Yeah, it is actually, but to make sure that that is tied in, as well as a lot of parents aren't aware of the fact that once the child turns 18, they are not a child anymore. In the eyes of the
And
state, they're
that
an
becomes a
adult.
whole nother,
Right, with guardianship.
Guardianship.
So that's the transition planning, because I know, again, through doing this, there's the guardianship piece potentially, but also even for Social Security, if a child was on the parent's Social Security once they turn 18, then there's an application process because they are considered a legal adult.
Yes.
Not all families, are aware of that. So there's the transition planning. We always called it falling off the cliff, because
That's
it's
exactly
like a
what it
deer in the
is.
headlights.
Yeah.
Parents don't always realize, because many instances, children with disabilities go to school till 22. Sometimes they'll come out at 18.
or
but
somewhere in between.
somewhere in between, and they're eligible to apply for services, but families don't realize that this entitlement of the under 18 or under 22, it's like, no, this does not continue, and you have to qualify
Exactly.
for either DDS, Department of Developmental Services, or Mass Rehab, or
And
whatever.
Let's face it, whenever you're
It's
dealing
not
with
easy.
the state, then you're talking backlogs of applications and
It is a process,
as
and
early
it's
as
a
you
process
can.
that you really should start early, particularly if you have a student who does not have the capabilities to live independently.
Right, 'cause
And handle their
residential.
own affairs and things like that. Guardianship becomes a big issue, and that is actually handled by lawyers, not by just special ed advocates or anything
Right,
like that.
right.
The Federation has a pool of guardianship attorneys that they can refer families to. The other thing that we have, which I think is really important, is the Federation has outreach specialists speaking about families that may not understand this process because they don't speak English, or that is not their primary language.
Right.
We have outreach workers that speak Spanish, Portuguese, Cape Verdean, Haitian Creole.
Haitian Creole, yeah.
They are Cape Verdean, they speak Haitian Creole. French, I might have said Portuguese, Cantonese, and Mandarin.
I think you
That's-
said when we were talking earlier, Russian as well.
We
right,
do have
yeah,
an
the-
employee who speaks Russian fluently. And they can reach out and help parents in their primary language.
That's great.
To be able to do that. We also have a language line. So if you call the Federation's main line, we have a very long voicemail message, outgoing message, and it tells you if you are calling, it actually greets you in all the primary languages that we have outreach workers. So not only is there an English start, but then it greets them in
Right.
Chinese, in Mandarin and
Spanish,
Cantonese.
right.
And,
Yeah.
Which is great
and it
because-
tells them to hit button number 1 will take them to the outreach worker's voicemail. So they can leave the voicemail
In their
primary
language.
language.
Yeah.
So, because nothing is worse than calling and getting an English speaker only that tells you to, if you, for Spanish, hit 1.
They're not going to understand
They don't
it.
understand the message to tell them
Yeah.
what to do. So we do that. But we also have a language line that if I needed to speak with somebody about their child, we can do that through using a language line that takes
wonderful.
up to 250 different languages.
We use something similar in my job as well. I work for the state, and we do the same exact thing. If you need to, I'm in hearings for my organization, so if you need, a different language
Right.
other than English, whatever that primary language happens to be, we'll
It's
do the
there.
same thing. And those language lines are absolutely phenomenal for that exact reason.
Right. I mean, when I was in the call center, we would have somebody who would call in, needed to speak Arabic. And I have 4 people in the call center who don't speak Arabic, nor do we have.
So that's where the language
I
line comes
happened to
in.
be fortunate enough to know someone who was an advocate who spoke Arabic and would tie them together, or they would do a 3-way call
Right,
for me.
right.
But now they don't have to do that same aspect.
It's
This is-
1-800, whatever the number is.
Exactly, exactly. We're also, we're very conscious that our Visions of Community Conference, which is the Federation's main conference every year, it just happened 2 or 3 weeks ago, is done in all those languages as well. So we have tracks where not only is the speakers doing their presentation in Spanish, but if you speak Spanish and you wanted to attend my presentation on resilience, you could do that, and a translator would go with you into that session with you and do that.
That's
So,
incredibly helpful.
I'm going to ask one last question because I
Sure.
know we have to wrap up. ASL,
yes,
that's an issue near and dear to my heart, and I can never find some place where, as a working professional, I can learn off hours, because is the Federation someplace where I can go to and say, can you help me find someplace that can teach?
Family Ties would be the direction I would go.
Okay.
We'd use ASL interpreters every time we do conferences. So we have multiple people on the screen.
Right.
And fabulous interpreters, several of them, so they can hand
And
off.
it's very intensive because you're constantly moving.
Yeah.
So
So that's where you have to have somebody
absolutely.
who can come take a break.
Exactly.
Yes.
And they usually switch out partway through.
Exactly. So we've tried to make everything at the Federation accessible. We just recently did a redo of all of our presentations so that they can be read on screen readers. So that
For
the fonts,
seeing
so the
impaired.
alternate text for all the graphics and things like that. So we realized that we needed to update ourselves as well and make sure that it was accessible to everybody.
I think COVID is
It's changed the
really-
landscape.
exactly.
But it's also brought to the fact the needs of
Yep.
the families that many times need it
And
so much.
falling through the cracks.
And falling
Yeah.
through the cracks
Yeah,
because of that.
which we want to prevent. That's the whole point of a place like the Federation.
Exactly.
I am going to toss in one last question because I do want to add in, there's that inclusiveness, intersectionality. Do you deal with families of those who may be struggling with their sexual identity in addition to a disability as well? Or maybe not even struggling, they know they're trans or they're gay or whatever that, sexual preference is, if that's the right way to put it. I want to be very sensitive, but also have a disability of some form. And
Yeah,
how
'cause
are
then
the
you're
parents?
layering
You're layering it,
problems,
but
yeah.
nobody's one-dimensional.
isn't the
We,
right
we
word.
all have,
Yeah.
Yes.
we're all three-dimensional people, so we are complex. How does the Federation
Each of the
address
projects
that?
has resources and things. Family Ties, again,
Is
is our
okay.
resource go-to. I know that the Information Center can give parents resources in multiple languages.
That's great.
I've recently been looking for a friend of mine to be able to find resources in Spanish for a family whose child has come out, and they want to be able to support them, but they don't understand.
Right.
And so it's actually interesting that even the Mass Commission for LGBTQ Youth does not have anything on their
Yeah.
website in Spanish. Surprising.
Really?
Interesting.
Surprising on that, yeah.
Yeah, that's surprising.
But the Trevor Project does.
Okay.
So there are other organizations that do. We work closely with DCF and, our project works closely with DCF, but to try and make sure that kids are in safe schools or safe living environments when they are living in congregate care facilities. There actually are some centers throughout the state that are congregate care facilities that are just for kids who identify as such. Waltham House in Waltham is one of those, so every student
That's
has to
great. I
fit
didn't know
into
that.
that
That's
category. So
And
it's
is that done for their
definitely
safety or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
safety as well as comfort.
Okay.
That
And
makes
to have a
sense.
staff that understands that aspect of it,
Right.
so that there isn't bullying or anything that might be
Right.
going on.
And they're supported.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they're in a school district that has those supports
Services
as well.
available
Yes,
to support them.
yes, absolutely. So,
Because, I mean, it's, and I hated that I used the word problem, I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay.
But it's, people aren't just boxed.
Right, right.
Just because you're A doesn't mean you're not also B or.
They're not segregated.
Exactly.
They're not segregated,
and people
but
need
also
to realize that there's an interconnection irregardless of
Yeah.
what's going on.
exactly. And,
So-
and the Federation's mission really is to bring that intersection together
Yeah,
of
right.
a family, of a culture.
yeah.
Not just a language, but the cultural
Cultures.
aspects.
Yep.
Right.
Someone who is Portuguese versus Brazilian, those are very,
those are
the
very
language
different,
may
yeah.
seem to be the same, but they're not.
they're not.
But the cultures are very different.
Right, well, it's like being, because I worked in Lawrence for several years, Dominican Republic, then there's Puerto Rico, then there's Mexico, because
And
people
do
will
not
lump it together.
confuse
You
them.
cannot confuse them, and there are different dialects and different cultural, intricacies that go into that. so,
Absolutely. I have a son-in-law who's Haitian American.
Yeah,
So he's not African American. He is Haitian American and is very proud of his heritage. So if I were
As
to
he
work
should be.
if I were to work with his family,
Yeah.
that understanding needs to come.
Yeah,
So
Exactly.
we have the same in our household.
Yeah.
My husband is both Latin American and African American, but he identifies on his mother's side, which is Latin American. That doesn't take away from his genetics, but that's, you know, so if people just say, oh, that person is, and that's not the
right,
case.
right.
we actually hit that when we ask demographic information, which we are required to because we're federally funded.
Right.
But for many people, are you a parent or you're a professional? Which one are you going to check?
Yeah.
We consider you a
Yeah.
parent first.
I'm
Right.
sitting there going, I am both.
Yeah.
I am both,
But
but
the
we don't
parent
have that
comes
category,
first.
but we do consider you to be a parent first. But understanding that
sense.
it is, because I can be in your IEP meeting and be calm, cool, and collect as an advocate, but once I am sitting there for my own child, it's
That's
You're
a
gonna
different
lose
story.
that. Yes.
That's a different
It
story.
is a
It's more
different
emotional.
ballgame. And that's what we're here to try and help families be able to, access those services for
That's
their
right.
kids and really have the kids have whatever you consider a typical childhood, as opposed to feeling like they're always something different about them.
Yeah, and I
think
think
that's-
that's fantastic.
that's a great note to end on.
Yeah, we could probably have this show for 3 hours,
Yeah.
but we've got our on-set director going, wrap it up, wrap it up.
Thank you.
And they're in charge. so-
Yeah, they're in
Exactly,
charge. So thank
exactly.
you so much for
Thank you.
being here.
Thank
This has
you.
been incredibly informative.
And, as new things happen and as more things happen, we'd love to have you back and break down other parts of the Federation.
And I'd love to actually bring some of it, like the Link Center director,
That would be great.
along, and we
We'll
can
do
do a
another
session
show.
just
I-
on
we'll do
transition.
another
I'm
show.
currently booking November, December, and January. We'll talk right afterwards, and
All right.
we will book another episode.
Absolutely.
thank
It's
you again.
wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary Beth, for joining us today. You can email her at mlandy, that's MLANDY, at F as in Frank, C as in Charlie, S as in Sam, N as in Nathan.org, military background, or call 617-399-8341. Now, this information is special just for the residents of North Andover. The town of North Andover is seeking to fill vacancies on many boards and commissions. Each board and commission has its own obligations. If you're interested in volunteering, please visit the town website at www.northandoverma.gov and click on Board and Com on the left-hand side of the page and complete the volunteer form. It's really easy. You can also contact Jillian Brothers with any questions at jbrothers, that's with an S, brothers, at northandoverma.gov, or you can call her at 978-688-9510. And I say this every month, and I'm sure there are people out there that are like, well,
They still don't know.
Exactly. Are you aware of the town's Community Choice Power Supply Program? Have you switched back to the town-sponsored electric plan yet? You can call Colonial Power Group at 866-485-5858, extension 1 to learn more. But you must opt in to obtain the town contracted rates. Go to colonialpowergroup.com/North Andover or again, call 866-968-8065 and ask to join the North Andover program.
We'd like to thank the crew this month from GLTS, Greater Lawrence Technical School.
Alex still didn't make it up
Yeah,
there, and he's so great.
and we don't have anyone listed. I apologize. We do have 3 people. Zachary Jones, also from North Shore Academy. John Kafori from Greater Lawrence Technical School, who is our alum, who is hanging out and helping us all the time.
And Cassie's back there too.
Cassie is back there. I apologize. I don't have her last name. And also Carly,
Bonanno.
yes, Bonanno. And Carly Jones from Curry College, who always comes back to help us out. She's our floor director, and she keeps us running.
And she's my daughter, so she enjoys being able to say, Mommy, wrap it up already.
So, and we're already, as Phyllis mentioned, we are booking into the next season. So, and join us in April when our guest will be Women's Money Matters. We have a representative from there. And State Rep Tram Nguyen will be discussing her legislative agenda for the upcoming session in May. So we're really looking forward to that. Our season will end in June with our guest, Minnie Meva, M-E-V-A, and that'll be about transportation. Next season, we'll start off with our October guest, Maternal Mental Health Leadership Alliance. We are actively looking at booking guests, as Phyllis said, for November, December, and finally, January 2024 episodes. We're so excited about this.
We're actively finalizing dates.
Yep.
For State Senator Barry Feingold, State Representative Adrian Ramos, Essex County District Attorney Paul Tucker, and Governor's Council member Eileen Duff.
Yep.
I know people are like, oh my God, all the politicians, but each one of these guests will have a direct effect
On how the laws are made.
yeah, and implemented, and how they relate to all of the abilities, and they'll be here to discuss those roles. They're not running for re-election in the process.
We hope to have more news from nonprofits we have reached out to soon, and we're looking forward to that. We are consistently looking for new topics to explore as well here at Ability Assistance. We would truly love to know what topics you would want to know more information about. If there is something specific you'd like to learn about, please email Phyllis. I'll let you take over.
At pjones@northandoverma.gov, or you can call me directly at 978-494-0136. And in addition to watching through your cable station, you can catch all of our programs on demand. I think that's what gets most of our guests on here, is you can catch them on demand via YouTube, the Cablecast app through Roku and Apple TV, North Andover CAM's website, and everything is rolled out on podcast via Podbean. So until next month, thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a great month.